Hey everyone, welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. We are glad you're joining us today and hope you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you lead your students in ministry. We wanted to stop and remind you about our social media. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Talk Student Men, and then you can also find us on our website, studentministryconversations.org. Today, we are going to hear a conversation with Russell, and it's a conversation he had with Dr. David Fraze. Now, David is on staff at Lubbock Christian University, and he is also a renowned author for many books, including Practical Wisdom for Youth Ministry. Since your conversation is going to be over this topic, Russell, why don't you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, Brent, I met David through National Youth Workers Convention. Every year they will offer the opportunity to sign up for a free hour of ministry coaching. And I did that 2 years in a row. And I actually had David for 2 years of doing that ministry coaching. And it was great to talk to him. He brings so much wisdom into youth ministry. He has a lot of experience with coaching, with consulting, with teaching, with being in youth ministry and being involved with that for so long. And so he put all this wisdom into this book, or actually into these two books. And so we kind of unpack those a little bit. We talk a little bit about what's in the book, what could have been in the book, why he did what he did, and why he wrote what he wrote. And so I just invite you to come and join this conversation and to glean from his wisdom and to grab some things that you can put into practice in your own ministry.
Hey, that sounds great. Without further ado, here's Russell's conversation with David Fraze.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. My name is Russell Martin, and I am glad to be here with David Fraze. And David, there's so many things that I could say about you and I could try to explain about you, but you know you best. So would you take a moment and would you share a little bit or a lot about who you are? Just let us know who you are. Tell us the story of how you got into ministry, how you got to where you are now.
Wow. Well, thank you, Russell, for letting me be a part of the conversation. We met at Youth Specialties at the National Youth Workers Conference and had a session together. So amid all of those hundreds of people, we got to have an individual conversation. And I wish they really could have heard what we talked about before we started recording this, because I'm a big fan. So now I'm a groupie of your podcast. So thank you for introducing me to this, and so glad that you're doing this. So for me, I have been working with students for 32 years. So yes, I'm a child of the 80s, born in the 60s, 68. I've been doing this for a long time. As I like to tell people, I went from flannel graph to video projectors. And interestingly enough, I still use flannel graph when I talk to students, and it works because it's so old school. My word, I am just a guy who works with students. I think if I were to introduce myself, I hope that people know that I'm a lover and follower of Christ. I think that's the most important thing. I want to be an authentic person in that world. As far as, ministry practice, I've been in, local church work. I've worked with parachurch organizations, FCA in particular, helped start Teen Life, which is a parachurch organizations that reaches out to public schools. My ministry has always impacted public schools. Not that it doesn't have impact with private schools, but I've always tried to look for ways to get our youth ministry outside of our buildings. That's kind of been my deal. So ministry practice, I'll write from that angle, I work from that angle. Now that I'm back in the academy, I got my doctorate at Fuller. Chap Clark was my mentor in my projects. So got involved with Fuller Youth Institute back in 2007, did a research fellowship there, working on Deuteronomy 6. So I'm really closely connected with Fuller. Loved the research, loved my program there as far as taking research and putting practical application to it. So that's kind of my bend in everything that I write and I do. I believe if you do research that it doesn't make a practical impact in the local church, especially in my regard with youth workers, I don't know why you're doing it. So it's great to write a dissertation, but write something people want to read. And that's really kind of sometimes condemning to the academy, but I think we're doing a really good job. There's a lot of people, I don't want to mention names because I'd leave somebody out, but there's really good research leading to practical application that I think is changing the way we do youth ministry, but also impacting the church as a whole. So I'm excited about that. Not alone in that angle. Right now, other than teaching, which I'm the chair of youth ministry here at Lubbock Christian University, I also work as a performance and character coach with a local high school. So I spend a lot of my days in the uncaged world of adolescence, in Texas high school football, which, yes, sometimes it is a cult. And I work with students in that regard. I also work with the Dallas Cowboys organization with their youth academy. So I had the opportunity to speak about character and performance to kids who come to us for football instruction. I never played in the league. Everybody's played in the league but me. When we introduce ourselves, it's kind of embarrassing. I'm like, hey, I went pro in academics, and everybody laughs at me. But it's quite an interesting world of brokenness and people needing to remember what their identity is, and help with that performance mindset as well from that identity piece. And that's kind of what I've been doing. Wife Lisa, 31 years, son Braden, he's going to be 22. My daughter's a senior in high school. And I'm about to be a grandfather. My son's going to have their first child. So Papa Fraze. I think that's just about it. I love Star Wars, long walks in the park, and mowing my yard. So there you go.
Well, yeah, that's definitely a great overview of who you are. And it gives us a good picture of who you are. So I contacted you. I mean, I knew you from coaching stuff. I follow you on Twitter. I saw you put up that you had a book. And so I did a research and found out you have 2 books. Are those the only 2 that you have?
Yes.
The practical
Owning Faith, I worked with. That's another book, just a chapter in that book. But yeah, just 2 solo books right now.
So, I mean, that's kind of what piques my interest. I think I remember this guy. Mm-hmm. I reached out to you. And I do want to get to the books and the wisdom that's in there. But my bet is that there is a reason that you wrote those. Like, you talk about having a daughter in high school and mm-hmm. other children who've been through youth, and you've done youth ministry for a long time. You teach with youth leaders. What is it that brought about writing that book? Because I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom that is in the backstory of that. So how did you come to that point? Why did you think it was important to write a wisdom about wisdom in youth ministry?
There's 2 books, same kind of motivation. I teaching for so long, if you were to look at the first book, Practical Wisdom for Youth Ministry, it represents the syllabus for my strategic issues class, where this is how you do it. It's not everything, but as you'll see in the introduction, it's a quick start guide. Because I think a lot of people, you get a job, you sit down at your office, you're like, what do I do next? And you can pull that book off the shelf and say, okay, this is a Kickstarter. It has 3 phases to it. The why we do it, kind of theological underpinning, the how, so suggestions of how to do it. The now, what do I do right now? So it's a good quick start guide for people who are either in volunteer positions or just started in a job. And what I found out, that's kind of a couple of years old now, but what I found out for some of us crusty people, it was good reminders of what good ministry practice looks like. That's the official kind of, if you were looking at the book commercial, but I found, I'm going to play my old man card. Is that all right, Russell?
Yep.
I think there's some, man, this is going to sound really old, so get ready for it. Work ethic's significant. And I think somewhat in ministry, and you've probably found this as a senior pastor, there's some soft skills that we need to remember as far as how to do our jobs. And I don't think we talk about that enough. There are some things we just have to do. If you want to have more freedom to go to a coffee shop and hang out in the afternoon, you probably should show up in the morning, right? So that could be the very minimum, but how do I communicate in a world that's saturated with cell phones? You don't text parents. They still read emails, and that's so uncool. But, from the very basics to the idea of how do I deal with crisis? How do I deal with arguments? How do I deal with, moments of pain in my personal life? How do I take care of my health? All those questions are answered. simply put, the second book that I wrote with my friend Walter Serdacki, Practical Wisdom for Youth Group Parents, is all the things we've always wanted to tell parents that can help us be successful as ministers. And it's awesome. If I may say, we talk about how to hire and fire. We talk about how to have a fight, how to volunteer, how to serve with, how to be a affirming part of it. We really push that Deuteronomy 6 mindset, but to very practical application, so that parents, and that's synonymous with adults in this book, can partner well with their youth minister for success.
Yeah. We had Walt Mueller a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about partnering with parents. And so, he kind of talked about how for a long time, the youth group either was like, hey, we'll take your kids and then give them back to you, or parents saying, here's your kids, here's our kids, disciple them. And so how that has changed, or how it should change, because what we have done hasn't worked. So any thoughts on that?
Well, Walt's a great friend. He is my favorite Philadelphia Eagle. I actually had him at my church, and he took a magnetic football helmet of the Philadelphia Eagles and stuck it on the podium while speaking in Dallas. So he has issues, but I love him. We've been friends a long time. Yeah. And literally, if you've been doing this any length of time, and you realize it's always been about partnership with families. And so I think you see the resources coming back to say, hey, we need to work together. Hopefully, knock on wood, this dry, clean parenting model of dropping kids off, saying, press them up, be sure they have Jesus when they leave. That it's really never worked, especially with the lengthening of adolescence. We got to take serious this idea that it's all of our jobs, Deuteronomy 6, to impress upon our kids God. And so I love what Walt's doing. I think others have joined in that area as well. So that's definitely something going on that we're very excited about.
Yeah, that's kind of been a theme throughout several of our conversations. Sam Halverson talked about it. He wrote a book on integrating youth into the body of the church.
Yes.
And how we are all one. He talked about youth services and children's church and ways to, even if you have those, to still make sure that it's not just the youth over here and the kids over here and the adults over here. And we're starting to see, or at least we're starting to recognize that maybe the way we've done it hasn't worked. And that we may need to be looking into and starting to do something different or something.
Oh, we can't. I mean, absolutely. Got a great illustration of that for you, because I have people that push back and say, well, they don't understand what's going on in the main assembly. And I'm like, well, they can feel it, because, there are moments, and I'm not against, and I believe in intergenerational, not just intergeneration. There's a difference in that. Intergenerational, we look for ways to strategically put old and young in the same spaces and to spiritually let that form together. So worship's a big piece, of course, but people push back and say, well, they don't understand what's going on. So this is kind of rude. Get ready. And I ask an adult, well, who's your favorite baseball team? And they'll say this. I said, how do your kids dress? Well, they dress in that favorite baseball team. Do you ever take them to a game? Absolutely. Well, why? Because they got to know this is our team. And I'm like, do they understand what a double play is? Do they really understand what's going on? No, but that's my team. I'm like, exactly. So they don't have to understand everything, but they do pick up the passion when they see dad crying at a song or mom crying at a certain prayer moment. They watch it, and all of a sudden they're like, this means something to them. They may not understand a single thing, but it means something to them. And I think finally, Russell, the church and its large movement of programming, that rudder's slightly shifting to say, maybe we are too compartmentalized. And that is a common theme in a lot of the literature and church leadership. And that's exciting to me.
I'm seeing that. I mean, I've moved from youth only perspective to doing a senior pastor role. And so I kind of have all those aspects. And so I'm asking those questions again. And part of that, again, is like I talked about before, is kind of looking, a little bit of guilt or shame, or, this was my mindset. And maybe it didn't work as well as I thought it did. And maybe I need to recalibrate. And I think it's going to take some youth leaders doing that, especially guys like, you doing it longer than I have. But for us to go, hey, maybe what we did worked for a time, but it's not now. And to have the ability and the wherewithal to say, okay, I did that, but we need to change. And here's why.
And I think that's where people like you are so valuable, because they don't call people like me in the academy till they have a problem. The church down the street calls, we need a youth minister. And I'm like, well, you had one. What happened? And again, one of the reasons why Walter Serdaki and I wrote this other book is because we make the point at the very beginning, this is not your youth ministry. And it's my parents, it's my generation of parent and your generation of parent. Our kids are a certain age, and we remember, as O. Stryker will say, that youth ministry 2.0, big events, thousands of kids, and we want our kids to have that. Well, the fact of the matter is that world doesn't exist anymore. And so, as Taylor said, we have secular and sacred, and they were separate. And when it was separate, it was easy to say, come to church. It's something different. Well, those things have meshed together. And now secular and sacred ruminate together. When we were kids, we had a prom alternative, because if you go to the prom, you will dance and die. And so you're like, nobody went to the prom. Well, now everybody does. We would never, some of the things that are kind of normative, we wouldn't do that. Well, that just shows the culture is different. But our generation of parents is like, that's what we want. So that's the standard they're raising up. And that doesn't exist anymore. It's not that we don't do activities and we don't have fun and it's not that we're not countercultural, but it's just different. And you said it 2 or 3 times. Our metric of deciding what success looks like is much different than a kid saying, man, I'm having fun. Or it's much different than church attendance, because half of our kids, especially in the cities where we work, they're in select sports, they're in advanced academics, they're in dance, they're in theater, and they will miss youth group when they think it doesn't have value to their future production. And that's a question that's, senior pastors like yourself have to address, is what does it look like to spiritually form kids? Because it's not the same way it was when we were growing up.
Okay, so dive in a little more onto that. What else is different in that, I'm picking up that there are things that we thought were successful in one way, but now we're kind of realizing they're not. And so maybe it's causing a little bit of a disconnect or a tension, or because we see that it should be this, or it's how we started doing it, but kids now are saying that doesn't matter anymore. This matters. What are maybe some other examples of that create that disconnect?
I will always say that, again, church attendance is important, because who you surround yourself with helps form that narrative. And it is significant in those relationships. It's accountability. But the idea of, and I'll give you an example. Let's suppose Russell is on an athletic team and has made a commitment to that. And you have a game on a Wednesday night. Should you go to that game? Should you skip church to go to that game? Let's say little David's in a theater, and next thing you know, the first performance is on a Wednesday night. I've accepted a responsibility. Should I not go to that Wednesday night performance because of a church assembly? When we were growing up, there wasn't any competition on a Wednesday night, because Wednesday nights were sacred. Sundays were sacred. You're old enough to remember Blue Laws, when nothing was going on Sundays. Very easy time to do ministry, because getting people together had no competition. So one of the things we have to just understand is there's competition for everything. And we can either try to figure out creative ways of supporting and maybe recasting school activity, theater activity as a ministry opportunity, as a mission field, or we can double down and say anything that interferes with the assembly times is sinful. And I think we live in such a polarized culture. There is a middle ground between those two things. That's one big deal. And it does still show the values of a family. I think families are torn between, I don't care if it's sports, academics, or any kind of extracurricular, how much can I allow my kid to miss before it ruins their grade opportunities? That's a real stress for parents. And we can't really lecture them. We have to help them walk through that, because that's a real concern. At the same time, we need to give them creative ways to prioritize, the spiritual. So, we used to do, week-long camps on the cities. We would do, we took a couple of days off. We found out when the mass break is from their competitive athletics or theater, and try to get the most amount of students. They weren't trying to plan around us. We were trying to plan with them. And I know a lot of people have pushback going, nope, we should plan. That's usually people who go to a private school that they still have Wednesday nights and Sundays. But the majority of our kids live out in the uncaged world. And we got to learn how to reprioritize not only our family schedule to make spiritual important, but also not be inflexible with our scheduling as ministers. That's a big thing.
Well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I sensed, I guess, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, kind of this idea in my head of how arrogant am I, or how conceited am I that I only consider it value when you show up at a time that I found convenient, that I set 6:30 to 8:30 on a Wednesday or a Sunday morning from whatever time that was. That's just an arbitrary time. There's nothing special about that. I mean, God didn't say meet from this time to this time. That's just how it's traditionally worked well. Mm-hmm. That I was seeing, well, why can't you be here at this time? They are available to do other things, or there's other ways to reach out to them. And the other thing that struck me as my time is I was flipping through Instagram. You find out where everybody was. So Sunday night I'm flipping through and I see kids who aren't at youth, and I wonder where they are. And one kid's fishing with his dad. And I thought, I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to say anything, but in my head, I was like, there's a part of me that wants to go, where were you? But then this overwhelming part that said, man, he was spending time with his dad fishing. Why? That's way more important than your Yuck games or your Color Wars or whatever that is that you want to do. And so I started seeing, where students are involved. And, I see sports, and I see dads coaching their kids playing sports, and they're spending 2 or 3 hours, maybe more than they would spend the rest of the time. They have time with their dad. And so why am I trying to schedule things on top? And so I started to look at, is my schedule family friendly? Like you said, are we working with them as opposed to programming against families?
Well, and if you haven't, it's so funny. You're absolutely right. I remember having arguments. This was probably about 20 years ago now. I wanted to have a family activity at 5:00 on a Sunday night. And remember, we used to have Sunday night worship. Mm-hmm. Most denominations, you went home, came back for a night worship. It was based on a farming schedule, by the way, not the Holy Bible, but we were raised, if the doors are open, you go there. And I missed more Roger Staubach comebacks because we'd have to leave before the fourth quarter to be sure that we got to church. Even though the deacons were listening to radio earpieces, that was a whole weird thing. Wasn't security, it was to see how the game went. I think that I remember that conversation because this one church leader was so upset that I would suggest meeting at 5 instead of being in the auditorium to try to get the families together to have a little education. And the unique part about it was that was, again, the beginning of understanding families are getting busier. And am I going to ask them to stay an hour and a half after they've already been there when Monday is school? And so eventually we started doing some things like that, but the fight just to say, okay, culture's changing. These people are so busy. It was bigger than I thought because we have baptized all of our church practices. And if you do that, then they cannot be changed. But you said it, Russell, they're just arbitrary based on our cultural needs, and we can change again. And I think that's one of the gifts. We talked about this again before we started talking on the recording. COVID has been horrible, but it's also given us two gifts. One, it let everybody know we really need community. This is great what we're doing. I'm looking at you as we're doing this podcast, but I would much rather be sharing coffee with you in person. It's a great substitute, but it's not coffee in person. The backside of that is a lot of churches found out that people don't value their community because they haven't come back afterwards. And we should ask hard questions. It's not a matter of faithfulness. It's a matter of, are we providing community that people want? That's the other thing is, when we had to do things like go online and change times, and we also found out we can be creative in adapting to our challenges and still be faithful to God. And those were two gifts that COVID gave, I believe.
Yeah. And everything we've been talking about, it all ties into, practical wisdom. But basically my thought is you sitting down going, here's what I've learned from all my years, and here's what youth leaders are thinking about. Here's what you would need to know. So I want to kind of do a post-COVID in a minute, but what are some of the things that when you think back through both the books, what are some of the things that just, if you say entertainment matters, marriage matters, office hours matter, all these things matter, and we could probably do a whole podcast on each individual one of these, because I think there's so much in each of those. But for you, what are the ones that jump out? What are the ones that you say, hey, if I could only tell you 2 or 3 things, if I could only cut 3 chapters out and give it to you, what are the ones that you think are some that just come to mind?
No, I think partnership matters. I think people need to know, I'm trying to figure out that they're blending together now, both of them. I'm like, okay, which one was it, the blue book or the red book? And I just thought blue pill, red pill from the Matrix. I wish we would have done that. So anyway, I think partnership is going to be one of those ideas. And I think that the conflict chapters are very significant, because we have a tendency to think if we're in conflict, something's wrong. And man, I try to normalize that. I really figured that out. At a time, I avoided conflict and I became a pleaser. And I think a lot of us go into ministry because we like people, we love people. Well, we can't take away, Jesus was in conflict every time he ran around, but at the same time, you don't search out conflict. But when it happens, how do you deal with it? How do you work with people in which you have disagreements? I think that was significant. I do believe teaching, there's two, if I had the most basic things, teaching and communication, we got to do a better job. And I think sometimes we let technology and/or resources, we've lost the ability to take the Bible and craft a message, or we've lost the ability to just send simple communication to people and keep them in the loop. I think those are simple things that, especially the teaching part, I think it's a sin to bore kids. And you don't have to be the very best, but we have so much. And there's some basic things, though, that you'll see, especially in Practical Wisdom for Youth Ministry, of how to launch a lesson, how to land a lesson. That's I think it's significant, especially in our world that's saturated with messaging.
And that's just to point out to the readers, if you grab the book, there's like 30 or so chapters in each one.
Oh, it's a lot.
I mean, conflict matters, entertainment matters, parenting matters, office hours matter, outreach matters, physical health matters, relationships matter, retreats and camps matter, safety matters. So there's a whole long list, but they are fairly easy to read, and they would be a good resource if you are a youth leader, if you have volunteers in youth ministry, just because I know it's one of the things that a lot of times we'll get a volunteer or someone who is voluntold. I mean, as Doug Field says, you raise your hand to use the restroom and you come back and you're the youth leader.
Yep.
The books are easy to read, bite-sized information, and would be great to put in hands of someone who can just read a little bit, or to go through this with your volunteer team. I may start using it as a coaching resource when I'm coaching with new youth leaders or someone who's starting in ministry, because I don't know that we do a good job with that. At least in my experience, we say, hey, you got a pulse, you're younger than other people, and so you'll do great, here you go. And we don't tell them, hey, I think if we had some basic things to start off with, I think we could help youth leaders last longer than 1 or 2 years and burning out, and to keep them going longer.
Man, you've captured it, Russell, because as it says in the beginning, I talk about a computer. When you get a computer, you have the long list of instructions, but nobody reads those. I mean, you may, I don't know, but you do get the quick startup guide. And you're like, how do I plug the keyboard into the computer? Or, now we're all on laptops, which Apple cord do I need to stick in because they've changed the outputs again? You want to know, you want that diagram. And that's what this book is. And you keep it on your shelf and you're like, I'm about to have a conflict with someone. Well, what are some things I need to remember? I'm having trouble in my marriage. What's going on? Well, pull that out and look at it and say, am I doing these things? And you'll see kind of the fun part of both books is every chapter has personal stories of successes or failure at the beginning and the end. And so they come from personal experiences. So you're going to read how, safety, I was involved in a really horrible accident in May 2nd of 99. It's not a matter of if, but when. And that a lot of those practices and safety and forms were built out of hands-on tragic safety experiences, good, bad, and ugly. So they come from a practical hands-on way, but I put it in the theological and then very practical execution model.
I mean, it's also a good check. Like I was looking at the safety matters and the systems check. Hey, do I have liability forms? Do I have release forms for everybody? Do I have volunteers that are background checked? And do I have a medical kit? So those are all just practical, easy things. And so these were all written before COVID. I mean, did the parent one come out before?
The parent one came out. Yeah, it was written during COVID. And we actually mentioned a lot of that because it just changed some things. So when you look at, especially the very beginning, it was kind of cathartic. And I can say this because of, when you're old and you write a book like that, it's the things you wanted to say to your youth parents. Like, I can't fix your kid. Being in youth ministry is not going to make him popular. Youth ministry is not going to fix your church. I mean, all these things. In the hiring, firing, which you'll see a caveat saying you may not be the one that hire and fire, but you're a part of it. And I want you to know the process. There's very simply put in both of those chapters is when you hire or fire, it is always personal because you're dealing with a person's calling, her calling, his calling. You're dealing with someone's calling. And two, you're asking her or him to join your family. So hiring and firing is always personal. And so we try to say at the beginning, you can't just terminate or hire and treat them like a business because it will always be personal. And one of the neat parts, and you'll see in the Practical Wisdom for Youth Group Parents, after we wrote it, we put out on Facebook, hey, we're writing, if anybody wants to, what would you say? And it was affirming because all the chapters that we wrote were like, okay, we got a good product here. But then we took a lot of those comments and just put it in an afterwards. It's called In Their Own Words. And you can read what real live uncaged volunteers, paid youth ministers, unpaid youth ministers are saying about the relationship with parents and adults. And it was good. It was kind of fun. So we just included all that in there as well.
Well, I like that. I also liked on the first one, the phrases that matter.
Yes.
Yeah. So you are not as great or as bad as people say you are.
Preach it.
And you kind of give just a little bit of things like people over programs. you become what you measure. So you talked a little bit about measurement before. And so this will be a transition because I want to go from what you wrote before, because the first book, the Red Book, is, the Red Pill, before COVID, to things that have changed. So how did what you measure, even if it was right, if it was good before, how did that change pre-COVID to now?
Well, I think, and I redo, I kind of touch on measurement again. I'm not so sure how much it changed. It just became more noticeable in that, yes, numbers mean something. If you have 20 kids and you show up, now there's 5, you're going to ask a question. It's not that they're not relevant. Yeah, you got to have money. Are people giving to this or not? There's things like that do matter, but it seems like that has been a big deal. Butts and seats and budget, and also commitment. Jesus said, go and make disciples. We've translated that in the Western world, go and make converts. That is so American church, because that's not what we're talking about.
Okay, so go ahead and break that down just a little bit.
So, well, when you look at disciples, Jesus said, come follow me. And as Alan Hirsch would say, the great church stir, he's like, well, when was Peter a Christian? Was it when he said, you're the son of the living God? Was it after he denied him? Was it when he was a racist in Galatia? And so it is I think we look at a point when you're in and when you're out. And even though it's God who saves, we want to know, okay, did you make a confession? Did you join the denomination? When were you baptized? All those things are important, but we make them an end of themselves. So for instance, in youth ministry, I got to get this kid baptized. I got to get this kid to make a profession of faith. I got to get this kid, through confirmation. Some of those are constructs that make us feel better as adults because we think a kid's arrived, but literally discipleship is a journey. And so at times we hold ministers, youth ministers, in their ability to convince a growing young adult of something about Christ, and honestly, that sometimes we're not even convinced with. We want them to have some kind of terminal conclusion to their faith, is based out of our fear and not reality of discipleship. So that's kind of what I mean by that measurement. Now, I think what you find in the Red Book, if you will, is confirmed through COVID. We're like, can we count people on the virtual audience? It's amazing how we changed, not just butts and seats anymore, but it's butts on screens. Whoa, well, that's interesting. Is that real church membership? Well, it had become real church membership. And one of the weird things in a lot of our churches, especially those when we activated our coaching through youth specialties for a while, budgets actually went up. People gave. And I found that really interesting. I kind of want to know why, but a lot of it's like, okay, I'm in a different rhythm. I'm going to give to the Lord. Maybe it was out of fear that if they gave, COVID would go away. I don't know. But it caused us to look at, do we fire our ministry staff because we used to have 20 kids, now we have 10 because their parents don't want them to show up? Are they still doing their job? Do we need this person? Can we be creative in how we measure whether that person's being successful? I don't think the plane's landed. You know that as a senior pastor, I'm not so sure we've decided what church is going to look like. I'm just glad that we've been thumping that metric of numbers of churches. One thing that we found too, I'll say this to answer your question. I have a lot of churches, especially in big church areas, that I do consultation with, that their students will go to one church to worship, but go to another one for programming, because that's where they feel like it's family. And that's just kind of interesting to me. They'll go to the big worship thing and they got the big band and speaker, but they don't really find their community there. They just, tap into worship and they go somewhere else.
That's what we found even before COVID at my previous youth group. I told them, I said, we're not going to build anything we can't sustain. So I don't want to have a group of 100 kids for a concert and then not have the small group leaders to sustain that. So we built slowly as we went, and we had a lot of kids because they were like, this is where we feel Good. We like to being with our small group. And so that's how we continue to build our program.
That's why I think youth ministry could be leading the way, Russell, because I think some of those conversations were already going on, weren't they? Because we had huge concerts at the last church I was at, over 1,000 kids, which is weird for it was 2009 or so. And we stopped because, and this is going to sound bad, but there was no return. So we were attracting other kids who wanted to hear a concert, and half the kids would go outside because they thought, I don't like this band anyway. So first of all, it was a waste of resources. And then it really wasn't leading to deeper community, because one of the things we wanted is, and again, it's what we measured, are these kids growing in the, say, fruit of the Spirit? Are they growing closer together? Are we seeing decisions for Christ that make sense in discipleship and not just an emotional moment? And we didn't find that in a big concert event. So we yanked that money and put it towards retreats and resources to help our adult leaders be more trained to walk with students.
Definitely. So what are you telling youth leaders? I mean, you said you teach them and coach them and you consult with them. What are you telling them? Not necessarily after COVID, because we're still in there, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but what are you telling them now versus what you were telling them 3, 4, 5 years ago? You've probably shared some of these things already, but what else are you telling youth leaders that you could share with us?
I think, I'm going to say 3 things, and I'm not so sure, like I said before, I'm not so sure it's changed, but the need for it's been accentuated. I learned a formula from Chap years ago. I don't know where he got it. We can't figure it out, so I give it to Chap. Needs plus resources equal programs. And to do a needs assessment, to listen, and you'll see some of that in practical wisdom for youth ministry, that you got to understand what the needs of your people are. And then what are your resources that you have at hand? It could be as simple as a church van or a youth room. It may be, adult volunteers or theological comfort. And there's a lot of questions, again, that are in there in that book that'll help. And then you look for the program. I think we have a tendency to see what another youth ministry does and plug it into our church. And it may fit a need, but maybe we don't have the resources to carry it off. Maybe there's a cool D Now thing that some Baptist church down the street's doing. Well, that takes your entire budget. So don't do that. So that's one thing, is be a missionary a cultural missionary as you program. So needs plus resources equal program. The next one is relationship and relevance, that you have to have a relationship with Jesus and a relevant lifestyle. And then you have to have a relationship with your students and speak relevantly from the Word of God. Those are the 2 R's I think are significant. Here's how COVID's changed those things. It's not just saying, hey, man, Russell follows Jesus, David follows Jesus. That's cool. I want to be around him. That's important. And we've done the dog and pony show. We can get their attention and give them substance, okay? But here's the word that I see over and over and over again. I'm not so sure it ever disappeared, but especially true this side of COVID. It's a word, authenticity. Authentic. It's crazy the world we're living in, that you can find an expert for whatever you want in the media, and the robots take you to wherever you want to go. Our students are figuring that out. The adults, pretty slow on the uptake, but the students, they know that not everything they read is true. So they're looking for authenticity. Part of that is creating programs and trained adults that allow students to express and explore doubt. That's a big thing that we found through the Fuller Youth Institute research, is kids that can express and explore doubt have stickier faith. We can't come across with a lot of certainty in an uncertain world. What I can be certain about is Christ, and his life makes a difference in my life. But while our families are saying, I need you to teach my kid to be certain about X, Y, and Z, whatever that X, Y, and Z is, our students are asking us some pretty big questions. It's not just, were dinosaurs here with Adam and Eve, or it's not just a matter of creation over evolution. It's not just the apologetics thing, which I like apologetics and I see a purpose in them, but it's the deeper questions of, I got friends that are gay. What do I do with that? I have friends that are coming from gay families. What do I do with that? I have friends that are Muslim, friends that are, those are the questions that authenticity and being able to hear them and study that with them, authentic hospitality towards them. Nobody's saying sacrifice what you believe, but authenticity to say either, hey, this is what I know, and I'll be honored to journey with you. I think they've heard enough condemnation speech from left and right, and they really are looking for an authentic adult presence. And man, that sounds old school, but you and I both know, because we are old school, we remember the names of adults more than we remember programs. And so that's been huge right now. Those are my thoughts.
You know, once you mentioned about those adults, I had like 5 faces pop into my head of volunteers who were with me when I was in youth. And it's interesting that you brought up doubt, because that's something Marco brought up. That's something that Brock brought up, that several people have brought up. And yet right now there seems to be, deconstruction. I hate to even mention it, because like once somebody picks up on it, I'll get comments. But I see that, and I'm listening to these conversations going, yeah, I see what you're talking about. And I'm not going to get into the depth of that or definitions, because there's so many things going on there. But I think a lot of times people are just expressing questions in the church, in the older church, that doesn't want to answer. The answer can't just be read the Bible more and have more faith. But that's a lot of times the answer that students get. And I saw this in youth ministry, and now that I have a chance to change that and to do some of that as a senior pastor, I can't say that doubt is the most welcome thing in church, when it probably should be, because that's how you take ownership of your faith. You go with, my parents said this, my pastor said this, my Sunday school teacher said this, and then now I have to take that and kind of break it down and then rebuild it into what my faith is, or like you said, the sticky faith.
Well, one of my favorite things to do is I teach general Bible at Lubbock Christian. So 40% of our student body are not believers, That's a lot, and it's pretty typical with a lot. We have great education, great sports, so people come. Well, I get to teach them in general Bible. It's one of my favorite things, and we do. I tell them we're going to be civil, but we're going to question all this stuff. I welcome doubts, and the authenticity of that, Russell. That's where it comes in. They're like, hey, this guy believes in this, first of all, but he welcomes my doubts. And I think when we're growing up, we poor doubting Thomas, we think he's the worst thing in the entire world, but he could have been the bravest of the 12. To say, I'm not really so sure. And we've kind of villainized him. And so we've trained ourselves not to ask questions. What I found out is the older people in our church love that approach. The younger people are like going, yeah, this is what we need. The ones that are threatened again are the parents of these kids that we have now in youth ministry, because we're operating in fear in this country. Whatever political party you're in, whatever, if you're a mask, no mask, vaccine, no vaccine, everything seems to be wrapped up in a cross or a flag. So if I'm a student and I am being not only being formed in my faith, Deuteronomy 6, but I'm being formed as a citizen of this country, I am sorely disappointed in the adults that are around me, because nobody's getting along. And with COVID and the lack of a year of education, I think and that's why we're all talking about doubt. I would doubt. We already have doubts, right? And we're old. And so students have doubts. We have to welcome them. And when we do, it's going to authenticate our narrative of the way we think God acts with us. But it's a scary position, because we don't have answers for all these questions.
And I think that's important to say when we're talking to students or an adult or a parent or a senior adult or a grandparent, someone in your church or wherever it is. I think it's important to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out.
Yes.
let's dive into the Bible and let's talk to people who've been there, and let's talk to other parents. Or, somebody talked about one of the greatest things we can do is be connectors as youth leaders and as pastors, whether that's a parent coming with my kids talking about suicide, or my kids having these thoughts, or I haven't been there, but let me connect you with someone who has, or someone who can help, or find information or scripture or a person or whatever that is how we can be connectors of that. And to be honest, too, because I think a lot of times if I'm a pastor or a teacher or something, you think you have to have all the answers. And I think it's one of the worst things you can do is to pretend like you have the answers, because they're going to look it up.
Yeah, they are.
I'm probably being fact checked while I'm preaching, while I go, with the students and the messages that I give.
Absolutely. And they'll film you and put it out there for the whole audience of the world. And I think that's an important thing, in that if we don't allow our kids to ask us questions about all the things that make us uncomfortable, they will say, "Hey, Google." And we've already talked about the bots. That sounds like some kind of weird conspiracy, but the more we search things, the more it leads us towards the answers we want, or different angles. That's the way that it works. And the new commodity today is not a product. And this should, if a parent's listening to this, I think marketers are doing really well because the commodity they're selling is attention on screen, not necessarily a product. So companies will pay enormous amount of money to just throw something on a screen for 10 seconds, because that screen is something that's grabbing the attention of our students. That could be anything. But it's, if you really want to freak them out a little bit, I built onto my back porch and I wanted to look for some patio furniture. So I searched patio furniture for a long time. Well, the next time I went on Facebook, guess what was on the ads? Patio furniture. None of that's a mistake. And so this is not a conspiracy, or it's not weird, because I'm not one of these anti-social media, anti-technology people, but you do got to know how it works. And so if we're like, well, we don't ask those questions at church, we really are damning ourselves, because we look very irrelevant.
Yeah. And it's simple to say, what is, on Google, the answers they get. Would you rather them ask a question at church, or would you rather ask their friends or the professor, or Google or Snapchat or TikTok or whatever that is? Well, David, again, these two books, Practical Wisdom for Youth Leaders and Practical Wisdom for Youth Parents, Youth Group Parents. So those are both available. I encourage everyone to check those out on Kindle or Amazon. But David, if you had a final thought to share, we could probably do a whole podcast on each of these tips, but there's also only so many weeks in the year. So if you had one final thing, maybe something you've already shared and to emphasize, or something that you want to make sure that youth leaders and youth group parents know, what would you share?
Well, man, I guess, let me just say a word of comfort. God is still God. We're not. Nothing that is happening in our world is falling out of his attention. So I think that's one of the things that I think we need to just relax, take a deep breath, that God is still God. His kingdom is fine. Things can fall down around us. They have a tendency to do that in the world, but God is still God. That's just the 10,000 view foot. Right where I live, when it comes to being a parent of a teenager and a parent of an emerging adult that's about to have a kid. And I'll have a conversation this afternoon with another parent, literally just got a text message before our podcast. God loves our kids more than we do. And I think that's a great word. Every parent, every adult that's worked with a kid will have the "I wish I would have, could have." That's part of the sorrow of separation. It's why we overparent when they're seniors in high school. It's why we can't help tell a young mother something we believe, a young dad, hey, let me tell you this. We're filled with that because we're also filled with regrets of "I wish I would have, could have." And man, we should seek to be our very best and be held accountable by our friends, be the very best adult influences. But at the end of the day, our God loves our kids more than we can. And that gives me great comfort.
Man, that's great. And well, David, can you let us know how we could get a hold of you if someone want to get in touch with you, Instagram, Twitter, whatever? How can we get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So David Fraze 1 is my Twitter handle. I kind of live in Twitter world more. Easy to find through David Fraze on Facebook. There's two of us. I believe the other one's very wealthy. He lives in California, and if he's listening to this, congratulations. I'm the not so wealthy one. I have an open Facebook page, so somebody could just message me if they'd like to do that. I'm easy to find through Lubbock Christian University. I don't mind giving you my email because I think sometimes people need to reach out. Is that good?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. It's david.fraze@lcu.edu. Best way to get a hold of me. And I try to do a really good job answering those emails as quickly as possible. The books you can buy on Amazon. I think Practical Wisdom for Youth Group Parents is not quite ready yet.
Actually, it is. I got both books on Kindle, so
awesome. Okay,
they're at least available that way.
Those are working, and it's awesome with literature like this. And I think Walt will say this, so Stryker, everyone like that, man, put a review down just because I think that the more people put reviews down, it helps to bring such writings more to the attention of practitioners. It's not a really big deal to say, hey, here's a book in youth ministry. Not the most top selling thing going on out there right now. I don't know why, but those kind of help resources. And one day when Russell puts his book out there, which it's coming, brilliant you are. Hopefully you'll have some of your thoughts to impact the church real soon.
Well, definitely. And I love your format. I was looking at your format going, hey, I kind of like this, the way it's done. So I may talk with you later about coaching and also about writing a book. So
let's do it.
Anyway, well, with that, David, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that everyone else enjoyed the podcast, and we'll talk to y'all later.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by this week's episode and that you found tools that you can use as you pour into the lives of your students.
Yes. And as a reminder, if you enjoyed this episode, let someone else know. You can do that by posting a review on wherever you're listening to podcasts, or you can do that by sharing this with someone else or any of our episodes with someone else. Share it on social media and tag them and tag us at Talk Student Men. If you would love to be a guest or you know someone who has something to share about student ministry, have them get in contact with us as well. And then finally, go check out the shirts. Also go check out the affiliate link we have with Grow Curriculum, or make a donation to the podcast, because everything that you do in that way helps us to continue to bring you great shows. So Brent, next week is your great show. So what is in store for us next week?
Yeah, so next week I sit down with another friend of mine, Keith Parker, and Keith is the student team lead at Greenford Christian Church in Greenford, Ohio. And he sits down with us to have a conversation about how to have a holistic view for your youth ministry. And so it's a great conversation. I had a lot of fun recording it, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it.
That will be great. And reminder, go subscribe to the podcast, and that way you'll automatically get this dropping into your inbox wherever you're listening to the podcast. Also, make sure if you want to go check out the website, studentministryconversations.org, we'll have more show notes, links to everything that David mentioned and all of our other guests have mentioned. Just search for whatever episode you're looking for in the search bar, and that will bring that up, or you can pull up the podcast list and you can see all of the recent episodes. So go check those out. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.